A man whose face is disfigured by a rare disease undergoes an experimental treatment and becomes handsome. After meeting another person with the same disease, he gradually loses his mind. The film opens on a movie set where Edward, a man with neurofibromatosis, which has left his face disfigured by skin growths, is being filmed. After some direction from the director and an awkward conversation with a colleague, Edward takes the subway home, where he feels like everyone is staring at him. At home, he notices that a new neighbor is moving into the apartment next door. The movers carry in her furniture and accidentally scratch Edward's door. On top of that, he notices something dripping from the kitchen ceiling and puts a bowl underneath to catch it. Then he makes dinner while listening to an instructional video on artistic whistling. Edward is interrupted by a knock at the door. Startled, he accidentally cuts his hand with a knife. Outside, it turns out to be Ingrid, his new neighbor, who wants to apologize for the damaged door. Noticing Edward's wound, she offers to help treat it and brings a first aid kit from her apartment. After bandaging his hand, the girl looks around her neighbor's apartment, keeping up a friendly conversation, which is a bit unusual for the shy guy. The girl notices the red typewriter and shares that she dreams of becoming a playwright. Edward visits the doctor who is treating him for his condition. At the end of the appointment, the doctor tells him about a new experimental treatment that, in theory, could cure the growths on his face. But since it comes with certain risks, the doctor suggests that the patient think it over first. When Edward returns home, he sees that the damaged door has been painted a strikingly bright red, and paint stains lead into Ingrid's apartment. In the kitchen, the leak from the ceiling has gotten worse, forcing him to put out more dishes to catch the water. Then he goes to his neighbor to congratulate her on her housewarming and to give her the typewriter as a gift. Their conversation is interrupted by the arrival of another guy, who has come to visit the girl. As Edward goes down the stairs, he runs into the neighbor from apartment 4B, who is put off by Edward's appearance. Edward heads to another audition, where, besides him, there are plenty of other candidates without any visible physical defects. The only role he has ever landed in his entire acting career is a public service announcement meant to convince people to fight against prejudice toward those with unconventional appearances. Later, Edward shows it to Ingrid when she comes over to visit. The girl brushes a speck of dust off his face, which the guy, who's never been touched on the face by anyone except doctors, interprets as a sign of affection. An awkward misunderstanding arises, after which the neighbor quickly leaves, promising to bring a special face cream later. After this incident, he decides to sign up for an experimental treatment program. At the clinic, they examine him, run tests, and take measurements of the skin growth on his face before giving him the medication. They also treat the knife cut he has. The nurse tries to hide her disgust at the sight of him. While having lunch in the park, Edward enviously notices his neighbor from 4B walking with a beautiful woman. As he passes by a living Lincoln statue, he takes a closer look at the costume performer, examining his skin. The performer doesn't show any discomfort, but once Edward walks away, he glances in his direction. At home, he finds gifts from Ingrid by his door: laundry conditioner, candy, the promised cream, and a note typed on the typewriter he gave her. While he's munching on candy in front of the TV, a chunk of plaster and a piece of board fall from the leaky ceiling. Edward goes to bed, but in the middle of the night, he's woken up by an insistent knock at the door. At the door are the landlord and paramedics. They got the wrong apartment. They need 4B, where the tenant has hanged himself. Edward, along with other onlookers, watches as they take the body down, and he notices an orphan kitten. Later, he sits with the kitten, looking out the window as the medics load the corpse into the van. Edward and Ingrid go out to a cafe to have some pizza and talk about what happened to their neighbor. Suddenly, a random passerby knocks on the window, waving at Edward like they're old friends. After waving back, Edward admits that this happens to him sometimes. People on the street mistake him for someone else. Back at home, he checks out the leak in the ceiling, when a couple more pieces break off and fall right onto his head. Wiping blood from his face after being hit, Edward notices in the mirror that a piece of his skin just peels off. He goes to the hospital, where the doctor tells him it's a side effect of the experimental treatment. Edward is given a mask as a keepsake, made from a cast of his face and perfectly matching his features. As he walks home down the street, ignoring the chatter of the local crazies, he starts to feel unwell. Edward goes into a bar to throw up in the restroom, and then orders a drink. One of the patrons approaches him, saying he's seen Edward somewhere before. Edward isn't in the mood to talk since he feels nauseous, and ends up throwing up right at the bar. He returns home, where he cries in bed, either from pain or from shame over the humiliation he just experienced. Rubbing his face with his hand, he notices that his skin is flaking and peeling off, and he starts to strip it away like the skin of an onion. By morning, there's almost no trace left of the old growths. From the mirror, a slightly worn face of a World War II veteran stares back at him. He spies on Ingrid and her lover through the peephole. He eats lunch sitting on the floor. Basically, he entertains himself however he can while the healing process goes on. By the very next evening, there's no trace left of his old appearance. All dressed up, Edward heads outside to show off his new face in a nice neighborhood, where there's no risk of getting jumped. He goes back to the same bar where he threw up before. He orders a whiskey and joins a group celebrating their favorite team's victory. The pleasant evening ends in a bathroom stall, where some lady gives him a good time with little effort. Coming home at dawn, Edward looks at himself in the mirror, then goes to bed fully dressed. But he doesn't get to sleep. A maintenance man knocks on the door to fix the hole in the ceiling. Right after, one of the doctors who monitors Edward walks in through the open door. He asks why Edward hasn't shown up for his appointments for a week. Not being recognized with his new appearance, Edward says that the guy killed himself and introduces himself as Guy. Ingrid overhears their conversation. The story jumps forward in time. Guy has moved into a new apartment and become a successful real estate agent. His face is featured on the company's advertising posters where he works. One day, Guy spots Ingrid on the street and, giving in to his emotions, follows her. The girl arrives at a small theater on Broadway, where auditions are being held for her first play called Edward. Noticing Guy, Ingrid mistakes him for another actor and invites him to read the script. During the process, the man realizes that the play is about a woman's friendship with a person who has physical deformities. Ingrid wrote the script, basing it on her friendship with him. At the next audition, he comes wearing a mask left to him by the doctors, which is an exact replica of his face before he was cured. Amazed by his appearance and shy awkwardness, so perfectly fitting the character, Ingrid casts Guy in the lead role, not realizing that she had based the character on him all along. Later, she and Guy go out for drinks at a bar, and then head back to Ingrid's place to continue the evening. Guy notices the red typewriter he gave her as a gift, but she says she doesn't use it. She tries to seduce him, but out of old habit, like a seasoned virgin, he gets shy. Ingrid has to be persistent to get him into bed and pull his pants off. One day, during another rehearsal, Oswald walks into the theater, a man with neurofibromatosis who looks just like Edward used to. He was advised to come to the casting, but seeing that the role was already taken, Oswald politely says goodbye and leaves. Ingrid watches him though with a lingering look, then asks Guy to wear a mask during intimacy. However, that face just makes her laugh, and that's where the fooling around ends. When Guy and his real estate colleagues are celebrating another successful deal at a bar, Oswald comes up to him to say hello. The colleagues are charmed by the outgoing man and, despite his appearance, invite him to have a drink with them. Guy is bothered by how easily and naturally Oswald connects with people. It's as if he's looking into a funhouse mirror at the son of his mom's friend. At another rehearsal, Guy gets into an argument with Ingrid while discussing the character, when Oswald shows up again. Ingrid invites him to watch the rehearsal, and afterwards the whole troupe heads to a bar. Oswald charms everyone in the group, while Guy grows more and more dejected, looking like a pale shadow next to his new friend. After talking with him, Ingrid spends the whole night rewriting the script, making changes under the influence of Oswald's charm. The next rehearsal takes place with makeup being applied, but the prosthetics keep falling off Guy's face as he delivers his lines with emotion. On his way home, he runs into Oswald in the park, who invites him out for a drink in a friendly manner. While sitting in the bar, it turns out that Oswald doesn't work anywhere and lives off some successful investments he made in the past. Guy is surprised that his new friend knows such beautiful women, despite his appearance. As for himself, he's too uptight and insecure to make those kinds of acquaintances. On top of that, Oswald isn't the least bit shy on stage and happily sings karaoke. Meanwhile, Guy looks around at the other patrons, surprised that no one is looking at his friend with disgust. Everyone is busy with their own business, and even when they laugh, it's at their own jokes, not at him. Soon, Ingrid makes the logical decision to give the lead role to Oswald, leaving Guy for the finale. A metaphorical transformation occurs when the heroine looks at Edward with loving eyes and sees him as handsome. Reluctantly, Guy agrees. He doesn't really have much of a choice anyway. Soon, the premiere of the play takes place with Oswald in the lead role. After the performance, Guy sits off to the side, sulking, while Ingrid and Oswald bask in the spotlight. The next day, he reads the reviews in the newspaper, which also praise the performance of the lead actor. And then Ingrid tells him that there's no need for him to appear on stage as the transformed Edward, which means Guy is no longer part of the production. Guy listens to all this with a stony expression and a heart aching from betrayal. Later, he jealously watches Oswald, who has taken away the happy new life that was meant for him. Noticing how he spends time in the park with some woman and her daughter, Guy rushes to Ingrid to open her eyes. Oswald is cheating on her. However, it turns out that this is Oswald's ex-wife and his daughter, and his new flame is well aware of it. Devastated to his core, Guy goes into his old apartment and breaks the ceiling with a mop until the repairman shows up. Then he spends the whole night sitting on the floor wearing a mask of his former face, pondering the twists of fate. He never found happiness with his new appearance, while Oswald gets along with people just fine without any treatment. Apparently, the problem isn't about looks after all. Trying to make sense of his feelings, Guy goes to work wearing the mask, pretending to have his old condition. He shows the apartment to potential buyers, but his appearance and behavior scare a little girl and make her parents uneasy. After that, Guy is fired in disgrace. Sinking deeper into stress, he goes to the theater, where he disrupts the performance by running onto the stage in his mask and getting into a fight with Oswald. Although security tries to escort the unruly audience member out, the incident ends with a prop ceiling collapsing, followed by stage lights falling right onto Guy. In the next scene, Guy, covered in casts, is living in Ingrid and Oswald's apartment. He attends a dinner with the actor Michael Shannon. They discuss the possibility of adapting the play into a movie. Days go by like this. Guy lives with his former lover and her new boyfriend, who feels guilty about his injuries. When his bones healed and it was time for physical therapy, they hired a special nurse for him. However, behind his employer's backs, the nurse makes negative comments about Oswald's appearance, which infuriates the injured Guy, since he used to look the same way. Guy seizes the moment and attacks the nurse with a knife, then strangles him during a brief struggle. For the murder he committed, Guy was sent to prison. There, he still keeps silent with a sullen face, reads books, and plays basketball with his head. Basically, he does everything a decent inmate is supposed to do. Years later, when his sentence is finally up, a gray-haired guy is walking down the street, where Oswald spots him. He invites his old friend, now out of prison, to a restaurant to celebrate his freedom. At the restaurant, Guy learns that he and Ingrid are still married, are working on creative projects, and are planning to move to Canada. There's a commune there with sect members who practice nudism, free love, and drug use. Guy listens to them in silence. When it's time to order, he just can't make up his mind. Oswald notes that his old friend hasn't changed a bit. Guy looks into the camera, smiling. He realizes himself that he's still the same weak-willed, spineless person he always was, and that his appearance has nothing to do with it. That's where the film ends.